think the noes have it. The noes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Pensions, Special Rules for End-of-Life Bill, second reading.
No.
Mr. Lawrence Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the bill be now read a second time. This is a very small bill, very narrow in scope, but one which will provide financial assistance and fairness to people who are terminally ill and who have also seen the sponsors of their pension schemes become insolvent. It will do this by changing the definition of the words terminally ill for this purpose. In preparing this bill, I'd like to thank the Department for Work and Pensions legislative team and also, of course, my own staff. I think everyone in the House would agree that when someone receives the devastating news that they have a terminal illness, that they should receive as much financial help as possible during their final days, and that the loss of their rightful pension payments would be a blow that they should not have to suffer. And that is what this bill seeks to address. By way of background, the bill focuses on the Pensions Protection Fund and the Financial Assistance Scheme. The Pension Protection Fund was established by the Pensions Act 2004 and pays compensation to individuals when the sponsors of the defined benefit pension schemes, usually their employers, become insolvent and lack the necessary assets to pay those pensions to the level which the Pension Protection Fund would ordinarily pay. This is when such insolvency takes place on or after the 6th of April 2005. The Financial Assistance Scheme applies to individuals whose pension schemes were unable to meet their pensions liabilities in full when those schemes started to wind up between the 1st of January 1997 and the 5th of April 2005. Turning to the purposes of the bill, which is the compensation payments made to people with terminal illnesses from these schemes. When meeting the liabilities of the pension schemes, the Pensions Protection Fund can pay a one-off lump sum to someone who is terminally ill. The Financial Assistance Scheme can start to make pension payments, though not a lump sum, to someone at any age who has a terminal illness. The issue is the definition of a terminal illness. Now, the Pensions Protection Fund and the Financial Assistance Scheme use the same legal definition of terminal illness. That is, a person is terminally ill at any time if at that time the person suffers from a progressive disease and the person's death in consequence of that disease can reasonably be expected within 6 months.
Would my honourable friend give way?
By all means.
I'm very grateful. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful for my honourable friend giving way and want to commend him on bringing forward this bill. I hope he won't mind that at times I shall ask some questions about it, both directly and some comments that I may make later, just to assess. So he is just, my honourable friend is just talking about the assessment of what is a terminal illness. I wonder if he could just spend a bit more on who are making those decisions and what range of illnesses. Are the illnesses set down by the NHS? Is there a limited list of those illnesses? And who makes the assessment that particular case, that person is within the bounds of what would be called a terminal illness for the purposes of this bill?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. As I understand it, it is made by a health professional. The assessment is made by a health professional. Now, what illnesses he or she is entitled to take into account really goes beyond the scope of this bill. I don't think I can actually list those. The scope of the bill is about the period of time that someone is expected to live. So if my honourable friend will allow me, I think I'd have to leave my explanation there. So the question is that the disease can be reasonably expected to bring an end to somebody's life within 6 months.
Well, my honourable friend give
by
way.
all means.
I'm grateful to him for giving way, but just going back to that earlier point, Is there a provision for a second opinion to be obtained in cases of doubt? If he can't answer that today, would he write to me about that matter?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that intervention as well. I'm not aware of the particular process that someone would have to go through when being assessed. It's particularly concerning the length of time that somebody is assessed for living, and it's a technical legal point, but certainly I'm happy to look into that. So the definition at the moment for terminal illness is that the disease can be reasonably expected to bring an end to somebody's life within 6 months. Now, the Department for Work and Pensions did use the same definition for calculating benefits, but in the Social Security Special Rules for End of Life Act 2022, the 6-month period included in the definition of terminally ill was extended to 12 months. It does therefore seem to be logical to change the definition of terminally ill when applied by the Pensions Protection Fund and the Financial Assistance Scheme, so that it's consistent with the definition applied when considering making social security payments, and that the extension from 6 months to 12 months is what this bill seeks to do. Now, it's very hard to say how many people would benefit from this legislation. And actually, paradoxically, I suppose, we don't actually want people to benefit from it, because that would mean that the sponsors of their pensions fund had become insolvent, which obviously we don't want to see happen. But where that is the case, this bill will help terminally ill people. And while the scope of this bill is technically limited to the Pensions Protection Fund and the Financial Assistance Scheme, I hope that by bringing forward this bill to encourage any workplace pension that does not have provision for terminal illnesses when the member has a life expectancy of 12 months or less, to consider putting one in place. Depending on the scheme rules, many private pension schemes can already make what are called serious ill health payments under tax law if the member has up to a year to live. So it would be a change well worth making, certainly.
My honourable friend again makes another very interesting point, and it may be the Minister that will want to elucidate on this point. But he has just raised, Mandre, the particular circumstances of the Pension Protection Fund, which is there for when the existing pension fund has failed, and then made the connecting point that maybe a change here will act as an incentive for viable pension funds, if they haven't already got a 12-month period, to move to a 12-month period that therefore would mirror what the Pension Protection Fund is at. And so my questions, either for my honourable friend or maybe for the Minister in her summing up, would be, is there currently an understanding of how many pension funds have a 12-month provision? Does my honourable friend or the Minister think that this will act to increase that in viable pension funds?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for making a very good point. I don't have those figures myself. I don't necessarily expect the Minister to have them to hand, but I think that is something that we should look into and try to take forward, absolutely. Of course.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I think he's making a very powerful speech, which I'm sure most of us will have no difficulty agreeing with. I wonder if, in the conversations he's had leading up to the introduction of his bill today, he's spoken to charities and other organisations about the impact extending this period from 6 months to 12 months will actually have on people, their real lives, their families and their friends.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. Yes, particularly I spoke to the Marie Curie organisation, who told me of some very sad cases. I think it's important to stress, though, that as far as this bill goes, that it is referring to occasions when the pension fund or the sponsoring company of the pension fund becomes insolvent. So this is a very narrow bill. However, my honourable friend does make a very good point, and a number of examples were given to me by that charity, and many others do exist. And it goes back to the previous point of order, I think, that we should really look to extend this beyond the scope of the bill, but into other pension schemes, because the last thing somebody who is given a diagnosis of being terminally ill needs is more financial problems. So anything we can do in that respect, and I'm very happy to take that forward with the Minister and with the Government. So I thank my honourable friends for their interventions. And really, determining the length of time which somebody has to live does fall to health professionals, and it is a very heartbreaking and also an inevitably difficult judgment to make, particularly as modern medicine, surgery, palliative care, such as that provided by the excellent Sue Ryder Hospice in my constituency, and the general care provided by our NHS staff, make that judgment even more difficult. I do therefore feel that it's right to extend the definition of terminally ill from the very narrow band of 6 months to the more accommodating threshold of 12 months. Not only is this fairer to the people who are ill, but also to those who have to make the very difficult judgment, especially when those health professionals know that a person's pension payments may be resting on it. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill extends throughout the United Kingdom and comes into force for England, Scotland and Wales on such day or days as the Secretary of State may by regulation appoint, and in Northern Ireland when the Department for Communities in Northern Ireland may by order appoint. Just before I wind up, I think my honourable friend wants to come in again.
Yes, I'm very grateful to him for giving way. He's being very generous. He's referring, I think, to clause 2, subsection 4. Is he entirely happy about the wording of that particular clause and subsection? Because it could mean that this bill is passed by the House with unanimous support from all parts of the House, and then later on a minister decides not to implement it, and we can do nothing about it.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for picking up that point and mentioning it. I think I remain very confident that the government, because they've been very cooperative in the preparation of this bill, I think would not hesitate to name the day, as it were. So while technically, yes, it won't come into force until the government decides that it will, I am confident that that will happen. So for those reasons, and for all the reasons I've given, I thank my honourable friends for their contributions, but with regards to this bill, I commend it to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Philip Dunn.
Good morning, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you for calling me so early in this important debate. I'd like to start by congratulating my honourable friend for bringing this bill to the House today. I think he shares with me the prospect later this year of joining the ranks of the pensioners amongst our community. He failed to declare that in his speech, but I'm glad to be able to put that on the record for the benefit of members of the House. This is a feature of life which we will be fortunate, hopefully, if we get that far, to achieve. And it is, of course, an increasingly prevalent amongst our population that, thanks to the good work of the NHS, more and more of us manage to achieve pensionable age. I think my honourable friend wants to intervene. Was that the case? No. At the last count, that I've seen, there were nearly 12.7 million people claiming the state pension in May of last year. And the most recent census that came out in 21 showed that the population of pensioners in England and Wales over 65, which of course now the pension age is going up, is a slightly different figure, has increased from 9.2 million in 2011 to over 11 million in 2021, some 18.6% of the population. And in my constituency, where I think we probably share another characteristic with that of my honourable friend's constituency, we have a significantly above average pensionable proportion of the population, 30.2% of the population of pensioners. The reason I mention this, Madam Deputy Speaker, is because although this bill is very narrow in scope, it is of course possible that any of us, whether pensionable or not, could be diagnosed with a terminal illness, and therefore, although the actual application in relation to those who are members of defined benefit or defined contribution schemes is a subset of that, and within that very few, hopefully, will be diagnosed, it is important, I think, as he said so well in his speech, that we provide equity to those who do fall into this, have such a diagnosis. And therefore, I think the objective of this bill is an entirely honourable and appropriate one, and one that we should support. And while on the subject of pensions, if I may, as we have the Minister here, I would just like to raise with her a constituency case which was brought to my attention in my advice surgery last Friday by a constituent who I won't name, but is a member of the Boots Defined Benefit Pension Scheme. The Boots scheme was acquired by Legal & General quite properly in December of last year. And the new scheme administrator has decided, seemingly according to my constituent, without consultation with members, to remove the option to take an early pension from the age of 60, so that the pensions have to be taken from the age of 65. If this has been done without consultation with members, I would urge the Minister, and I wouldn't expect her to know the answers to this now, and I've written to the Secretary of State, because the Boots pension scheme, I think, is probably certainly one of the largest membership schemes of any retail business in this country. Whether or not the trustees were duly authorised to undertake such a significant potential change in terms for their members without consulting them. And having put that on the record, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to commend my honourable friend for his bill today, which I shall be supporting.
Jo Gideon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And since we're putting it on the record, I'm a proud pensioner and an MP. I'd like to thank my right honourable friend, the member for Tewkesbury, for bringing this bill forward. And whilst it is quite technical in its nature, it addresses a much wider issue, I think, that we're all concerned with. More than 90,000 people in the UK die in poverty each year, and that's over 8,200 in my region. Being diagnosed with a terminal illness is shattering, whatever your circumstances, but for those living in poverty, the impact can be even more profound. On the news recently, I heard a devastating story of a woman named Helen. She said she was dying of cancer and of cold. She talked of how she switched off her boiler because she couldn't afford to pay for heating. Her cancer affected the circulation in her hands and feet, and when the cold started to creep in, she couldn't hold things and was worried about falling. Helen envisaged her retirement journey travelling. Instead, she was stuck at home, worrying about how she could afford to pay her bills in her last months. Helen has been working with Marie Curie on their campaign to ensure that everyone who receives a terminal diagnosis is granted immediate access to their state pension. As a society, we should be looking out for and looking after the needs of those who are suffering. Those who are terminally ill shouldn't be left to fight for every scrap of warmth. Making ends meet can become impossible once you have a terminal diagnosis. Your expenses go through the roof, often just at the point that you have to give up work because of your illness. Your heating costs alone can be twice as high. Covering higher costs of heating, travel to appointments, childcare and essential home adaptations with little or no income is leaving thousands of dying people and their families in a desperate situation. Those of working age who die are twice as likely to spend their final years of life in poverty compared to people of pension age. Accessing their pensions early would give people back some dignity and independence. Marie Curie estimates that most people of working age who die have paid more than 23 years of national insurance contributions. As a civilised society, we should not put people through the burdensome and time-consuming benefits process or interviews with work coaches that are inappropriate for a person who will never return to work. Some patients have died waiting for the welfare benefits they need, and this does not seem right or fair. Everyone has the right to the best end-of-life care and support. In Stoke-on-Trent, we are really lucky to have the wonderful care provided by Dougie Mack. Back in September, Dougie Mack was named the best charity to work for in the UK. It is a charity that local people are hugely proud of, and I was delighted to hear this recognition of just how special the charity is to the people they look after, both in the hospice and in the local community, and the staff themselves. They are very much a local charity, supported generously by local individuals and businesses, Last year alone, I heard of a group who canoed an intense 60-mile journey from Fort William to Inverness, others who cycled the 186-mile Game of Thrones route. Some held a one-day book festival in Stoke-on-Trent, and one individual ran the brutal Marathon des Sables, all to raise money for Dougie Mac. We should all show this much care and respect for people approaching the end of their lives. The small change in this bill from a 6-month to a 12-month approach would help ensure people get the financial help they need as quickly as possible in the most challenging of times. It would be a significant step forward, and each of the experiences shared by individuals in the long process to get to this stage are valuable and important. We need to ensure that more people with a terminal illness can concentrate on making the most of the limited time they have left, rather than worrying about their finances. This must be a time spent in love and laughter, with dignity and compassion. I sincerely hope these changes are implemented quickly to ensure no more people already facing the most difficult time in their life have to wait to claim the support that they so desperately need and are entitled to. So I support the bill.
Philip Davis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow my honourable friend for Stoke-on-Trent Central, who I thought gave an excellent speech as to why this bill is so important and will actually make a material difference to many people. And to that end, I'd particularly like to thank my honourable friend for Tewkesbury for bringing forward this bill, because this is a very important issue, and it is for a number of people, and it sets out some important principles. And I do want to come on to the point about the staff that did when this bill will come into operation, that my right honourable friend for East Yorkshire made, because I think he did make a very important point that does, I think, deserve more explanation from the government. For a person to find out that their illness cannot be cured must be a terrifying experience, not just for the individual themselves who is sick and ill, but also for their friends, family and loved ones. And we as a Parliament here should be committed to alleviating the pressures facing those who are nearing the end of their lives. Now, since the 1990s, the Department of Work and Pensions has provided access to key benefits through what are referred to as the special rules for end of life. These are benefit rules that allow people who are nearing the end of their lives to get fast-track access to certain benefits. The special rules were first introduced in attendance allowance in 1990, following a recommendation by the Social Security Advisory Committee. Attendance allowance claims are subject to a 6-month waiting period, and the committee were concerned that some terminally ill people were dying before this period had lapsed. Eligibility for the special rules was therefore limited to people diagnosed with a condition that meant they were unlikely to live for more than 6 months, as established in the Social Security Act 1990. Since then, the use of special rules has been extended to disability living allowance, employment and support allowance, personal independence payments and universal credit, all with the same eligibility criteria. Current pension legislation contains provisions which allow a patient who is deemed terminally ill to claim under special rules and get the highest rate of financial help and faster. Paragraph 25B3 of Schedule 7 to the Pensions Act 2004 and paragraph 12.3 of Schedule 5 to the Pensions Act 2008 both define the eligibility criteria for a terminal illness lump sum, which allows the patient to apply to exchange all their ill health benefits for a one-off lump sum payment if they're diagnosed with a terminal illness and do not expect to live longer than 12 months. The then Work and Pensions Minister said that this would be using the same rules to define terminally ill as those that are used in the Financial Assistance Scheme and in DWP benefits. Historically, people eligible under special rules have not had to wait as long as others to start getting benefit payments, as no waiting period is applied. They're not required to go through medical assessment or face-to-face appointments, and in most cases have qualified for higher rates of financial help. The form supporting a special rules claim is completed by a clinician and is called an SR1. In order to access this fast-track route, people have to have been assessed by their healthcare professional as having 6 months or less to live, and this has become known as a 6-month rule, and that was a point made by my honourable friend for Tewkesbury about it being a healthcare professional who makes the assessment. The Pensions Act 2004 established the Pension Protection Fund, which provides compensation to members of eligible defined benefit pension schemes in cases where the sponsoring employer becomes insolvent on or after April 6, 2005, and the scheme lacks sufficient assets to fulfil its pension liabilities up to the level of compensation offered by the Pension Protection Fund. The Financial Assistance Scheme initially covered schemes winding up between January 1st, 1997 and April 5th, 2005. Since its inception, it's undergone reviews and expansions in both coverage and the level of assistance provided, and the Financial Assistance Scheme offers payments to members of qualifying schemes who are unable to fully secure their pension liabilities. Presently, the Pension Protection Fund has the authority to issue a one-time lump sum payment to individuals who are terminally ill and have not yet received their Payment Protection Fund compensation. Similarly, the Financial Assistance Scheme allows for early disbursement of financial assistance in cases of terminal illness. Both of the PPF legislation and the FAS regulations employ the same definition of terminal illness. Now, terminal illness is currently defined in pensions legislation as if the person's death in consequence of that disease can reasonably be expected within 6 months. This means that both the PPF and the FAS currently make payments where medical evidence shows that a member has a life expectancy of up to 6 months. This eligibility criteria was set in line with the Social Security special rules for end-of-life provisions for certain benefits originally introduced in 1990. The eligibility rules for these benefits was extended to 12 months by the Social Security Special Rules for End-of-Life Act 2022, which we all supported. What this bill tabled by my old friend seeks to do, simply, is restore the original policy intent that there should be an alignment between both the Pension Protection Fund and the Financial Assistance Scheme. Now, for more than 30 years, these special rules have ensured that at this most difficult time, people have got the financial support to which they're entitled, and they get it quickly and easily. Of course I will.
I am listening to my old friend's speech with great interest and a lot of detail in his understanding. So I hope you won't mind me asking some specific questions, which is he'll be aware that the Pension Protection Fund does not necessarily pay up to 100% of what people would have got if their pension fund had not become insolvent, and often insolvency occurs through no action really of the employees themselves, but actually about how the directors of the companies had made contributions to them. And he'll be aware that shortfalls in the Pension Protection Fund are paid out or covered by a levy that is charged on other pension funds. Now, I am almost certain that the effect of these changes, which, as my friend rightly said, is supported generally across the House, will be significant. But has he thought, or has he had an assessment of what the cost changes would be? Has he had any thoughts about what the implications might be on how the Pension Protection Fund might therefore have to change its rules, and or what it might mean for the levy that's charged on the pension funds?
Yes. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and he raises typically some very astute points that need to be considered. The short answer to his question is yes, I have. And if you'll bear with me, I am going to come on to that, because I did seek some advice, professional advice, on what implications this may have for those funds. And I promised my old friend I will come on to that. And if he feels I haven't done it so sufficiently, then he can feel free to have another bash, so to speak. Nonetheless, since those rules were first introduced, there have been significant advances in how the NHS treats and cares for people nearing the end of their lives, meaning that many terminally ill people are now living for longer with that particular illness. Given these advances, in July 2019, the then Secretary of State for Work and Pensions announced that DWP would undertake an in-depth evaluation into how the benefit system in the UK supports those nearing the end of their lives. As part of that consultation, the department sought feedback from the terminally ill, those who support them, and clinicians. And much of the reasoning and findings from that report are directly applicable to this bill. The evaluation's purpose was to consider the policy and implementation of the special rules relating to people defined as terminally ill. The evaluation aimed to take a holistic view of the support provided and took into account direct contributions from people nearing the end of their life who shared their first-hand experiences of accessing support via the special rules, as well as from charities and organisations supporting them. Now, as well as receiving written evidence, the evaluation team held engagement sessions, including an event for people living with or affected by motor neuron disease. They conducted telephone interviews with people nearing the end of their lives and met with charities who provide support for people nearing the end of their lives. The study also took into account the views of healthcare professionals who work with and support people approaching the end of their lives through National Expert Palliative and End-of-Life Care clinical groups, and nearly 1,000 clinicians from a range of professions in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland also had a chance to respond through a survey. These views should not be underestimated, as they play a large part in access to financial benefits under special rules, which is the bit I want to look at in a bit more detail. The department's findings agreed with the purpose of this bill. It showed that there was a consensus across all groups that the government should extend the current 6-month rule. It showed support for the DWP to adopt a 12-month end-of-life approach that would allow people in the final year of their life to claim under the special rules. An added benefit of the 12-month approach was that it would also bring greater consistency with the definition of end of life used by the NHS and right across government. The overwhelming evidence of medical advances in the last 30 years, since the special rules were first implemented in 1990, demonstrate that the law in its current state is no longer fit for purpose. In general, public health has changed dramatically, both with the pandemic and the advances in pain relief and other trial drugs that now make living with a terminal illness for longer more likely. The leaps and bounds made in both the care for terminal patients and the identification and diagnosis of these patients has progressed extensively. All forms of palliative care have progressed, from how people nearing the end of their lives are treated, cared for and their conditions managed, to how clinicians define people nearing the end of their lives, which is why my honourable friend's questions are so important, because of these huge changes that have taken place. New approaches in care have been developed by using the gold standards framework and daffodil standards. The ambitions for palliative and end-of-life care, a national framework for local action 2021 to 2026 NHS guidance, has also led the way in reforming caring for people nearing the end of their lives. The Gold Standards Framework is a registered charity and has been the UK's leading training provider for generalist frontline staff in caring for people in the last years of life for over 25 years. Their aim is to enable a gold standard of care for everyone with any condition, in any setting, given by any care provider at any time in a person's last years of life. This is focusing on the medical side of things, and this bill is hoping to provide the equivalent standard in terms of pensions. Both of these frameworks have been integral to the improvements in palliative care and the greater life expectancy of terminally ill patients. With better care and treatments, the longer people will live, hence the need for the amendment proposed by this bill. But one of the largest issues related to this bill is how clinicians define who should be eligible for the special rules. The DWP survey showed a consensus across all groups that the current definition is not fit for purpose. This is for several reasons. Some patients who have fluctuating conditions or uncertain life expectancy found it difficult to access the special rules as their life expectancy was indeterminable. There are many conditions that progress rapidly, then plateau, and some conditions that do this regularly. Two groups of patients that struggle with this are motor neuron disease sufferers and cancer patients. Now, in preparing for today, Madam Deputy Speaker, I contacted the Motor Neuron Disease Association to ask how they feel about the change and how it will affect people diagnosed with MND. Now, I'm sure everyone in the House is familiar with the Scrap 6 Months campaign led jointly by the Motor Neuron Disease Association and Marie Curie, which my honourable friend for Tewkesbury mentioned in his speech, and supported by thousands of campaigners across the country. They told me that this bill will ensure that a greater proportion of people living with motor neuron disease will be able to receive terminal illness payments from the Pension Protection Fund and Financial Assistance Scheme, and that this is important given the context of the financial impact of living with motor neuron disease, especially as symptoms of the condition increase. And so on that basis, they very much support the bill. Macmillan Cancer Support play a large part in end-of-life care and have their national call centre based in my constituency in Shipley. They told me that they were supportive of the decision to widen the criteria from 6 months to 12 months, ensuring those with a terminal diagnosis have timely access to financial support when they need it most. Now, in some cases, the 6-month rule forced clinicians and patients to have very distressing conversations about life expectancy too early or at the wrong time for them. Now, there are two ways, Madam Deputy Speaker, in which this issue can be tackled. The first being the 12-month rule, which is where we are with this bill, mirroring the end-of-life approach used by NHS England. The second is taking out the timescale, but using a clinical recommendation supported by guidance that doesn't have an explicit time frame attached to it, in effect looking at the nature of somebody's condition. The first option is an increase in the term of life expectancy to 12 months, which is what this bill would do. Obviously, this approach aligns the welfare state with the work of the NHS and therefore makes it easier for organisations across the UK who support people nearing the end of their lives to understand the application of special rules, because it makes them all consistent. Clinicians have many difficult conversations when discussing end-of-life care, and this can be added into those conversations instead of being had separately, which saves the NHS time too. However, I just want to point out that any time-bound rule could be subject to the same problems, as life expectancy can fluctuate and nothing is certain even within a year. And therefore there is an argument for making it based on a clinical diagnosis rather than a fixed term, which by definition is always going to be slightly arbitrary. Yes, I will.
For giving way. Can he just clarify the position? Is he saying that he would prefer this bill to be amended, or is he happy with it as it stands?
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. I support the bill because it's far better than the status quo is, and it's very sensible in order to even up those the situation. That's what my honourable friend intends with this bill, in effect to make sure that the rules for benefits and pensions are the same and that one doesn't diverge from the other. The point I'm making, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that this shouldn't be the last word on the matter, because it may not necessarily be the best outcome. It's a sensible measure to take, but there's a bigger issue here as to whether or not, across benefits and pensions, whether or not this is the right way to approach it. And the point I'm making is we shouldn't be wedded to the idea that a time limit is the right way to do it, and I think it does warrant consideration as to whether fixed time limits are the right way to go. The benefits of an open-ended time period, clinical recommendation, as it would allow greater access to pensions under special rules for those who have an uncertain prognosis, many of whom still have difficulty accessing benefits, whether it be 6 months or 12 months. The drawback of that approach is that a broader definition of terminal illness would make it difficult for clinicians to make decisions about who is eligible, which could lead to people missing out. The aforementioned survey done by clinicians to find out their views around this relating to the benefit system found that when asked what they thought the time criteria should be under special rules, 38% of respondents preferred a 12-month model, 34% preferred a model without reference to a time limit, and only 10% supported the existing 6-month model. And that therefore goes to the heart of what my right honourable friend for East Yorkshire was saying, that whereas everybody agrees that the 6-month rule should be changed, and that my honourable friend is absolutely right therefore to be bringing forward this bill to do so, there isn't much in it between whether or not people think it should be 12 months or there should not be a specific time limit. And I think that those views should be expressed in this debate for further consideration, given the subject that we are debating. So the conclusion on this point from the department was to make a legislative move to the 12-month rule, which is a perfectly reasonable decision to make based on that survey. That's now codified in the Social Security Act of 2022, and the exact same reasoning has been applied in my honourable friend's bill. Changing the 6 months to 12 months is clearly the most popular option based on that evidence and brings it into line with the rest of the benefits system. It would maximise the opportunity to improve awareness of the special rules and provide consistency in their application. And we should be making it easier for people nearing the end of their lives to access their pension, benefits and any other financial aid they're entitled to under the special rules system. The second argument taken into consideration for access to special rules was awareness and communication. The DWP evaluation showed that much more could be done to improve awareness, and respondents felt the information and guidance could be improved regarding access to special rules. And again, this bill might want to have something to say about making people aware of the change in the rules, because no good having a change in the rules if then nobody's aware of those changes, and I think that's something that needs to be considered too. Now, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, charities are vital in helping people make a special rules claim. People are often unaware that there's financial assistance and support available from the Department for Work and Pensions for people nearing the end of their lives. Clinicians can also play their part. Apparently, as written in a DWP report, some are not aware of special rules or have limited knowledge of them. When the department aligned benefits to the 12-month end-of-life approach, they expected to be able to improve awareness among clinicians by taking advantage of training and educational resources. Through those resources, the language should also be simplified. That was their conclusion, and I assume the same will be valid in this case too. On this point in the report, I should also mention that the clinicians raised concerns over the term terminally ill, which is in this bill. This is a term that they say is being used less and less these days, and patients are now being more commonly referred to as using terms such as end of life. This is a change within the field of palliative care, and one that maybe could be taken into account with the language in this bill and in the rules that the government use. But what actually happens when you try to put a special rule claim in? Is this something that the bill could make easier too? People nearing the end of their lives, or those that support them, provide the DWP with medical evidence that provides details of their clinical condition, treatment and response to treatment. This is most commonly done by a clinician completing an SR1 form. That form can be completed by GPs, hospital doctors and registered nurses, where they are working in a role such as an advanced nurse practitioner, a Macmillan nurse, a clinical specialist nurse, or a practice nurse with expertise in long-term conditions management. That form can be submitted either as a paper copy or an electronic copy, and in England by NHS staff using an online tool. Now, as I've said, some clinicians are not aware of or have limited knowledge of the special rule. Therefore, the clinicians who provide SR1s don't always fully understand the special rules and what needs to be included in them, and that means some patients find getting an SR1 or other medical evidence more challenging than it should be. In the DWP survey of the clinicians who had completed an SR1 form, the majority believed it was of value. 73% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed with the statement that the form is an effective way of providing evidence to support a patient's benefit claim under the special rules criteria, but 12% did disagree or strongly disagree. When asked to explain their reasons for their views, the majority said it was perceived as easy and clear to use, but some considered that the form failed to capture certain information they felt was important, particularly where the patient meets the definition but is receiving active treatment, or where it's necessary to explain the details of a condition other than cancer. Now, if this bill succeeds, as I hope it does, and the change is made from 6 months to 12 months, then this will be even more of a chance to potentially provide a more cohesive approach between the Department of Work and Pensions and clinicians to make sure that the right people are claiming special rules. In order to get benefits, there must be requirements for claims and ways in which to claim. The department found that more support around making a claim would improve the experience. They also received feedback regarding once a special rules claim is made. There was a consensus from those who fed back into the evaluation that having access to an online portal or some information on the progress of their claim would be helpful. Now, I promised my honourable friend that we would talk about the fiscal side of the bill. And I did actually contact Tim Middleton, the Director of Policy and External Affairs at the Pensions Management Institute, who I'd like to thank for giving up his time. Now, there are really two questions that must be considered about the financial repercussions of the policy. First, how many applications for full commutation on the grounds of serious ill health are received by the Pension Protection Fund scheme each year? I was told that the number is in double figures. It's really not many. I should say that Tim Middleton has been working in the pensions industry since 1987, and he's only ever encountered 3 cases of a special rule being applied to a pension protection fund scheme. So I think we can safely say that it's not a big number. The second question, which my honourable friend rightly asked, is were the application period to be extended from 6 months to 12 months, as the bill anticipates, what additional costs will the Pension Protection Fund incur? Now, obviously changes would occur because a member will be able to apply within the extended 12 months of a diagnosis rather than 6. The feedback I received, and like I say, I would make the point that this person is an expert in this field, and of course if the government has any different figures, we'd be all delighted to hear them. But he said that whilst there's likely to be an increase in cost, it doesn't seem likely that this would be significant, and in any event, for a scheme as large as the Pension Protection Fund, it is expected that these costs could be easily absorbed. So I think that should give my honourable friend some comfort that this is not going to place a burden beyond its means to the scheme, but it is certainly something that needs to be considered, and I think it would certainly be helpful if the Minister could let us know what her assessment of that is, whether or not it's the same as the one I've been given. By way of context, in the case of the ECJ judgment in the Hampshire case in 2018, it was estimated that the additional annual cost the Pension Protection Fund will be £215 million in that case, and would affect approximately 1,200 members. And the changes to this bill will be nothing like that kind of figure. Now, I did, Madam Deputy Speaker, for completeness, look to what some other countries did to see if anything that they did could be usefully included in this bill based on their practices and experiences. Looking at other countries with comparable systems and comparing their definition of terminal illness, it seems Belgium uses the phrase palliative status, which is defined as expected survival of a maximum of 2 months due to one or more irreversible disorders and with the intention of dying at home. The Netherlands define it as with an expectation to die within 12 months. Australia and New Zealand use average life expectancy of less than 2 years. In Canada, it's a terminal medical condition, i.e. a disease that cannot be cured or adequately treated and is reasonably expected to result in death within 6 months. Spain refers to people that will benefit from palliative care, for example, those with incurable, advanced and progressive diseases, limited life forecast, low possibility of response to specific treatments, and frequent crisis of needs, intense emotional and family impact on the care structure, high demand and use of resources. So from that, basically, we can see that there's no clear international definition of what constitutes terminal illness for the purposes of a welfare system, whether it be a benefit system or the pension system. Some countries, as we can see, have taken a time-based period approach, and others have gone for a clinical definition approach. I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the point I'm trying to make, I think, is that this is a wider area that needs more consideration more generally. But I think that my honourable friend is doing exactly the right thing in a private member's bill, which is making the point that the two systems, the benefit system and the pension system, should be exactly the same. There's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't. And so whatever system that we have in the future, I very much hope that we will always be able to keep a consistency of approach, because otherwise it's not fair. Now, I just wanted to mention, Madam Deputy Speaker, before I finish, the point made by my Right Honourable friend for East Yorkshire in one of his interventions earlier on about the commencement of the bill. And as he noticed, and to be fair, my honourable friend moving the bill actually set it out clearly, so it wasn't as if anything was being hidden, but my Right Honourable friend for East Yorkshire was absolutely right, I think, to focus on the fact that the regulations come into force on such days or days as the Secretary of State may, by regulations, appoint. Now, what I want to know, I share the same concern, obviously, as my Right Honourable friend, that we all think something's a good idea, and lo and behold, the House of Commons passes a thing, it gets passed by the House of Lords, and then nothing happens, which I think most of our constituents would find to be an intolerable situation. So perhaps the Minister can explain why we have to have such a woolly starting point in the bill, and we can't actually have a specific starting date. Why the need for that? Because I don't really see why there should be any need for that at all. Surely, at the very least, a date could be put in, a no later date, no later than X, Y or Z, based on the reasons why we need any delay at all. But I think it really is important that the Minister explains why we can't have a specific date, and why there might be a delay, and why we can't have a no later than date added to the bill. And I'm pretty sure that this may well be something that we all want to look again, either at the committee stage or at the remaining stages of the bill. I will give way to my Right Honourable friend.
Has he also examined Clause 2, subsection 7, where it gives the Minister power to make transitional arrangements? So, in fact, a Minister could introduce a 9-month period for a specific set of time. And I don't understand why we're giving this flexibility to the government. If the House approves it and the other place approves it and the monarch signs it, it should become law and be implemented.
Well, I think my Right Honourable friend makes a very good point, and of course one of the duties of members in this House who are scrutinising legislation and holding the government to account is to make sure that on a day when people are anxious to get through as much as possible and all the rest of it, that the government doesn't use that as an opportunity to sneak in a few provisions in the bill which will give them powers that perhaps the House might not otherwise want to give them, and make their jobs easier to change things in the future. I think that, far too many things, I think, at the moment are passed in this House which give the government of the day sweeping powers to change things without any reference to coming back to the House for any proper, meaningful scrutiny. And I think my Right Honourable friend is absolutely right to be wary of those measures. And I think the provisions in Clause 2 are provisions. I mean, it's a fairly short bill, but probably the most extensive part of the bill is Clause 2, which basically is giving the government powers to vary this and vary that and introduce it when it wants to and have powers to do this. And I think we should always be nervous about legislation that does that, which basically is it's a convenience for the executive rather than actual benefit for our constituents. And so I think it is incumbent on the Minister to explain why the government needs these powers as have been set out. Is there a specific reason why each one of these powers has been added to the bill, or is it one of these typical catch-all things, let's just shove the lot in there and hope that, just in case we might need it at some point in the future? Because I think we should always be wary of those. So if there's a particularly good reason why each of these subsections in Clause 2 are needed, let's hear it. Let's hear what that is, and we can all make our own mind up about that. If they're not needed and they've just been shoved in for a bit of convenience in case they might be needed at a later date, then perhaps as a House we might want to be saying, well, actually, we don't really think you should have those powers. We think that if you want to do something different, you should come back at a later date and make the case. So I look forward to hearing the Minister's response to that, and therefore these are maybe things that we could come back to in the remaining stages of the bill. But in the meantime, Madam Deputy Speaker, I certainly support the thrust of what my honourable friend is doing. He should be commended for focusing on something that's very important to many people and will make a massive difference to many people's lives. He will be thanked by many of my constituents and beyond, and on that basis I will be supporting his bill at second reading.
Rob Butler.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is a pleasure to follow my honourable friend, the member for Shipley. I must warn the House that I do not have his great detailed knowledge on this subject, so I hope that honourable and right honourable members will forgive my comparative brevity as a result. I would like to start by congratulating the honourable member for Tewkesbury for bringing forward what is an excellent piece of legislation. Being diagnosed with a terminal illness elicits a whole spectrum of emotions for the individual, their family and their friends. Initial shock, perhaps denial, then a struggle as they cope with the harsh reality of their prognosis and the plethora of emotional responses that entirely unsurprisingly generates. On top of this, many have to grapple with getting their affairs in order, adding stress and anxiety to ensure that in their final days and months they're able to support themselves and think ahead, potentially, to providing for those that they leave behind. And we do know from charities and campaigners that financial concerns loom large in the minds of those entering the final stages of their lives, precisely at the time when, understandably, they want to be focusing elsewhere. So I'm pleased that this Conservative government has taken action to help those who are terminally ill by extending the definition of terminal illness from 6 months to 12 months. And as has been set out, the Social Security Special Rules for End of Life Act ensure that people can claim financial support in the form of personal independence payments, disability living allowance, employment support allowance and universal credit that reflect that. That is absolutely right. And so I am pleased to see my honourable friend for Tewkesbury's bill before the House today. It should align the rules around the Pension Protection Fund largely in accordance with those other measures that are already in place. It is a simple administrative change. It will allow terminally ill people to claim assistance from that Pension Protection Fund and financial assistance scheme if their death can reasonably be expected within the next 12 months rather than the current 6 months. It may seem a small step, but it is a hugely significant one that will provide certainty for the terminally ill person and their family at a time of real stress and anxiety. And just very briefly, I also concur with him that this, while it may be a small number of people who are affected, it does send an important signal to pension providers more widely, and I hope that they will look at what is before this House today and the decision of this House today and reflect how they might better look after people protected by their individual pension funds. The Social Security Act received cross-party support. I hope the same will be true for my honourable friend's bill today. I will certainly wholeheartedly be supporting it today at second reading.
Shadow Minister Vicky Fox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I congratulate the Honourable Member for Tewkesbury for bringing this bill to the House today for its second reading. The Pensions Special Rules for End of Life Bill seeks to expand the eligibility criteria for receiving terminal illness payments from the Pensions Protection Fund and the Financial Assistance Scheme to all those with less than 12 months to live, up from the existing 6 months. This will bring eligibility in line with the Department for Work and Pensions' own definition of terminal illness for the purposes of social security payments. The shock and distress caused by a terminal diagnosis on the individual and their loved ones cannot be overstated. Those with a terminal illness should have the dignity of spending the time they have left in comfort. Their stress should not be further compounded by financial worries. Therefore, we wholeheartedly agree with the aims of this bill. It will, of course, only benefit a relatively small number of people. It relates only to those who have a defined benefit pension, which is being assessed by the Pensions Protection Fund or the Financial Assistance Scheme. But it is a step in the right direction, and I hope we can build on this to improve things for all those living with a terminal illness, because at the moment the reality is truly shocking to see. I also want to pay tribute to the Marie Curie charity for all the work they have done on highlighting the financial struggles of the terminally ill. Research by them in 2022 painted a harrowing picture. 90,000 people die in poverty in the UK every year. 1 in 4 people who die in working age are in poverty at the end of their life. And 1 in 6 UK adults would be wholly reliant on benefits if they became terminally ill. The cost of living crisis has worsened figures since these figures were published, and so I fear the situation is more severe now. As I alluded to previously, the DWP's own definition of a terminal illness for the purposes of social security rules is now set at less than 12 months to live, having been increased from 6 months by the Social Security Special Rules for End of Life Act 2022. We supported this legislation as it was the right thing to do and should provide a small amount of reassurance to those in the most difficult of circumstances. I do question why this specific issue was not looked into by the DWP at the time of this change. Whilst the issues do differ, that legislation related to benefit payments, whilst this bill relates to workplace pensions, it is important that there is consistency here so that those with a terminal illness have clarity on what they are entitled to. With that in mind, I hope the Minister could offer some reassurances that the definition of a terminal illness would be consistent across the DWP and its various agencies if this bill makes it onto the statute books. The Conservative cost of living crisis continues to hit families hard. This government's reckless decisions crashed the economy, sent mortgage rates soaring and energy bills through the roof. Receiving a terminal diagnosis is incredibly difficult at any time, but all too many people are now spending the time they have left in poverty. This cannot be right. The government must do far more to help these people. I will conclude by once again congratulating the Honourable Member for Tewkesbury for his dedication on this issue and bringing this important bill forward. It is a step in the right direction and we are fully supportive of its aims.
Joe Churchill.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to confirm that the Government gives its full support to this private member's bill, and I would like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Tewkesbury, for bringing forward what he said in his own words was a small, limited piece of legislation, but I think, as we've heard over the past hour and a bit, how important these small changes will be to those that it affects. I would like to thank, firstly, also other honourable and right honourable members for their contributions. North East Beds, the honourable members for North East Beds, East Yorkshire, Ludlow, Stoke Central and Shipley in particular, and my honourable friend from Aylesbury. I think in his explanation, my honourable friend for Shipley explained ultimately why this is a good idea, the alignment. Because, as we've heard, having a life-limiting illness can cause unimaginable suffering for the patient and their loved ones in its diagnosis, yet alone the trajectory of the disease. As many have said to me, it feels like an emotional tsunami, and anything we can do to help and just support those who are nearing that stage of their end of lives, we should do. My honourable friend from Stoke-on-Trent Central outlined very poignantly some of the challenges that for some come at this stage in their life. I would like just to pay tribute, because we've heard many charities mentioned. Marie Curie in particular, though, often provide that nursing care and sit with people as they near the end of life, providing an incredible service to constituents and making sure that people don't die alone. Their work is incredibly important, and obviously their campaign with the motor neurons disease has been mentioned. But we must also thank those in the hospice sector and also those more broadly across the NHS, particularly who work in end-of-life and palliative care, for the job they do. Now, we've heard much about the Social Security Special Rules for End-of-Life Act 2022 and how that changed the special rules process to allow simple and fast access to financial support through the benefits system. The changes made in that Act covered disability living allowance, personal independence payments and attendance allowance, and ensured that people at this most difficult of times could receive their support more quickly and more easily. The special rules were then extended to universal credit, employment and support allowance through secondary legislation that came into force on the 4th of April 2022. Under the special rules, claims are fast-tracked and a medical assessment is not required. No waiting period is applied, and in the majority of cases, the highest level of benefit is awarded. Since 1990, eligibility for special rules had previously been limited to those who had been diagnosed with a condition, meaning they were unlikely to live for more than 6 months. The changes that the government made in 2022 meant that people receiving certain social security benefits and who were thought to be in the final year of their life were able to receive this vital support 6 months earlier than they previously had, with additional compassion. As the 2022 regulations were coming into force, they were also welcomed by key end-of-life charities such as Motor Neurone Disease, who said at the time, "I welcome the announcement that the changes to the special rules this change will enable more people living with complex and unpredictable terminal illnesses like motor neurone disease to access the support they need swiftly and sensitively. This is an important first step, and we hope this positive change can be enacted for other applicable benefits as soon as possible." Marie Curie welcomed those changes, saying it would make it easier for terminally ill people to access support quickly, and the scrapping of the 6-month rule for fast-track access to benefits was a significant step forward. Macmillan said patients deserve better coordination of care into the last years of their life, and this change gives us a brilliant opportunity to help them benefit from end-of-life financial support while having treatment so that they can make the most of the last year of life. Now, this private member's bill takes that a step further in supporting those with terminal illnesses by extending similar support to compensation payments made by the Pension Protection Fund and payments under the Financial Assistance Scheme. As my honourable friend outlined, the Pension Protection Fund pays compensation to members of eligible defined benefit pension schemes where the sponsoring employer became insolvent on or after the 6th of April 2005 and the scheme has insufficient assets to meet its pension liabilities. Members can claim their compensation payments before the scheme's normal pension age, generally from the age of 55. The Financial Assistance Scheme makes payments to members of qualifying schemes that are unable to secure their pension liabilities in full. Currently, members of the Pension Protection Fund who are not yet entitled to receive compensation may make an application to their respective scheme for a terminal illness payment if they are expected to live for 6 months or less. Terminal illness is currently defined in legislation as if the person's death in consequence of that disease can reasonably be expected within 6 months. The Right Honourable Member for East Yorkshire and North East Beds asked what consultation and so on we had done, and we have consulted, as I think the Honourable Member for Shipley alluded to, with consultants, general practitioners, specialist nurses and other medical professionals. And this bill amends the definition to ensure that members with a life expectancy of up to 12 months can now receive these payments. It will restore the original policy intent for alignment between Social Security special rules provisions and the Pension Protection Fund. The same definition applies to the Financial Assistance Scheme, and therefore this bill also amends that definition. The financial assistance scheme differs from the pension protection fund in that the terminal illness diagnosis allows payments to be put into place immediately rather than providing a specific lump sum. I recognise that there are some who may argue the government should take a more open-ended approach and not put a time limit on payments. And this argument, as we have heard, may be particularly pertinent for those who have conditions such as motor neurons disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, Parkinson's disease, and a plethora of others, where it can be exceedingly difficult for clinicians and doctors to accurately predict how much time a patient has till their end of life. Unfortunately, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is not a clear-cut and correct answer for how terminal illnesses should be defined. So, as my honourable friend for Tewkesbury said, it should be left to the professionals. In recognising this, the Social Security Special Rules for End of Life Act 2022 was preceded by an evaluation in which the majority of clinicians who responded said that a 12-month definition was preferable, as it would bring the special rules for benefits into line with NHS practice and NHS initiatives such as the Gold Standards Framework. The Department agreed, and the 22 legislation aligned the definition of terminal illness with that used in the NHS, providing consistency for clinicians and tying the special rules into the NHS long-term plan of providing proactive, personalised and well-coordinated care for all those in their final year of life. This bill builds on the previous legislation by aligning the definition used for the Pension Protection Fund and Financial Assistance Scheme payments to that used more widely, both within the Department for Work and Pensions and the NHS. The government already believes the 12-month timeframe is appropriate for defining serious ill health payments in tax law. To meet the definition of serious ill health requires evidence from a registered medical practitioner that the individual is expected to live for less than 1 year. The Pension Protection Fund may be a compensation scheme rather than a pension scheme, but in many ways it is treated as a pension scheme for taxation purposes. This means that the Pension Protection Fund terminal illness payment falls under the category of a serious ill health lump sum, allowing for it to be paid without triggering unauthorised payment tax charges on either the individual or the Pension Protection Fund. Extending the definition of terminal illness for longer than a year would therefore open up members to significant tax charges on their terminal illness payments, which is not what the government wants at all. To my honourable friend for North East Bedfordshire, the impact on the levy he asked directly. We believe that the cost to pension protection funds will be marginal. Most members will simply get their payments earlier. He also asked about pension funds having a 12-month provision, and the benefits provided will depend on scheme rules. And we don't know how many have that provision, but we believe that many schemes already provide early access to lump sums for terminally ill members or those with a life expectancy of 12 months or less, because this is allowed under the tax law. To the Honourable Member for Shipley and East Yorkshire, who asked about commencement. As with any bill, as it progresses through both houses, it comes into force on a day appointed by the Secretary of State. It is the intention for that to start as soon as practicable after royal assent, to ensure that all NI, pension protection funds and financial assistance schemes all come in at the same time. To my honourable friend for Ludlow, I heard he had written to my right honourable friend, the Secretary for State, and I will make sure that that answer comes to him in a timely way. On who makes the decisions, clinicians, medical assessors and specialist nurses, and yes, to the honourable member for East Yorkshire, one can obtain a second opinion. And that goes for all those illnesses I laid out. So I thank all, as I say, honourable and right honourable members for their contributions, for the sensitive way in which they've approached the matter. I appreciate the time-bound argument that my honourable friend for Shipley put forward, but these things are always a challenge for clinicians. But I would agree with him and my honourable friend for Stoke Central when they both said that a better conversation about end of life and how we treat things as we move forward into that stage of our lives is a very good thing for all of us to be a lot more discursive about where we go with it. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to thank my honourable friend for Tewkesbury for bringing forward this bill, all honourable and right honourable members for their contributions. These changes will make a significant positive impact on people nearing the end of their lives by ensuring most members will be able to receive a payment at an earlier stage. It will give them financial support that they need at a most difficult time in their lives for them and their families. It will help them plan more effectively to get the most out of the finances that they are due. It sends a message about end of life, that conversation must be alive and vibrant for us all to talk about, so we do the best that we can. I am pleased to be able to support the bill, and I wish it a speedy passage through both houses.
With the leave of the House, I call Mr Lawrence Robertson to wind up.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. By leave of the House, I just want to very briefly thank the Minister for that response, and indeed the Shadow Minister for her contribution, and also my right honourable and honourable friends for the speeches and interventions that they've made today. I think they all have raised very, very good points. I think probably the most important one was raised by my honourable friend, the member for Shipley, about how this shouldn't be its right direction, but shouldn't be the last word on this issue, that we do have to look at assessing people in terms of illness. It's not just about time, but it's also about the diagnosis and the seriousness of those illnesses, and I'm pleased that the Minister did pick up on that. And I think we do need to look to extrapolate this principle into other pension payments and schemes, as I mentioned briefly in my speech. Finally, I'm very pleased that the Minister has confirmed that it's the Government's intention to make sure this legislation actually starts to have an impact as quickly as possible after Royal Assent, and I look forward to working with her and the Government on that basis. So thank you very much.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Joint Enterprise Significant Contribution Bill, second reading.